developed, wealthy, peaceful states shine a light into this world. A promising and welcoming light of rights, dignity, prosperity, and the freedom from war and persecution. This light shines brightly and lures in thousands of people, only to turn around and cause a searing blindness, one that is riddled with poverty and agony, and notably more prosecution, but this time it's in a language that the victim doesn't even understand. The state must control its borders. The state must not allow this injustice to happen, and that is why this House believes that states should be able to prioritize asylum seekers on the basis of cultural similarity with the existing population. Team Proposition believes that in the status quo, states have a robust and multitudinous system of criteria upon which they decide which refugees they accept or deny. We must prove that cultural similarity to the existing population is a legitimate criteria to prioritize over others. Auxiliary to that, we are going to prove that it is a beneficial criteria to prioritize both to the existing population and to the asylum seekers. We're going to do this through three arguments. First, the state and its borders. Second, ensuring acceptance. And thirdly, those left behind. The first are moral. Asylum seekers are persons fleeing persecution who go through the process of applying for asylum seeker status in the state in which they are not. By cultural similarity, we believe it will be up to the individual states to establish their specific metric, but it will probably include things such as proficiency in language of majority, potentially religion, geographic proximity, enabling the comprehension of customs and societal norms. Note, cultural similarity in this case is relative to existing population. In many countries in which asylum seekers arrive, there will be a diverse existing cultural population, creating many niches and specific enclaves for asylum seekers to enter. So this probably, in many cases, won't be the sort of extreme homogeneity Team Opposition is likely to push today. By prioritization, we just have to prove that this is a legitimate step for any state to add or keep to its current doctrine of acceptance. Important to note, this doesn't mean that we have to support states never taking refugees that are culturally dissimilar. We just think it's valuable, legitimate, and beneficial to prioritize. It's not a hard and fast rule. Team Opposition must also have criteria upon which they accept refugees. They need to prove to us why theirs are more legitimate, but more importantly, they have to prove why ours are not at all legitimate. Okay. First argument on the state and its borders.
What information?
Insofar as a state is a purely abstract entity, it only exists insofar as we all agree that there are lines in the ground that determine a certain entity in which there is a polity that governs the people. That is the tangible edifice of what a state is. This hinges on the relationship between the governing body and the people there. It's a mutually beholden relationship in which the people grant political support and their money in exchange for protection and the assurance of certain rights. Ultimately, there is no right to become a refugee with status in a state. Yes, we think it's a good thing on Team Proposition when states decide to take in refugees. However, it's only a good thing if two things are true. Firstly, it's only a good thing if that state can provide a high quality of life for the refugee they're going to accept. And secondly, it's only a good thing if it maintains the quality of life of the collective, of the existing populations, the citizens to which the state actually has their first and foremost mandate. This translates into the duty of the state to do their utmost to maintain harmony and order. If refugees cannot peacefully and productively be absorbed into a society, the government has violated its duty to its citizens, including the refugees who it has now decided to make into citizens. We think this is crucial. But secondly, under the idea of the state and its borders, as we've mentioned, and we will mention, states already have myriad tools in which they decide to accept or deny. Team Opposition's burden in this debate is quite a bit higher than what they'll probably lead you to believe. Please note, there is no RFD when you get accepted or denied as an asylum seeker. There's no formal decision with lengthy and logical analysis as to why you're accepted or denied. The state just accepts or denies you. So opposition really needs to get into the decision-making process at all bureaucratic levels of the state and change somehow how this is going to happen. With that in mind, I'll take a POI before getting to my second argument about assured acceptance. Yes?
What is the moral distinction between between refusing to accept someone because they speak English or because they are black.
The moral difference is that being black has nothing to do with how well you are going to thrive in your new homeland. Your ability to speak English really does affect how well you're going to be able to thrive in your homeland. Team opposition is also going to have to give you a metric by which they accept refugees because, panel, they can't take them all. They're either going to have to support a need-based approach, which will always be politically charged, and frankly, by the time you're shoring up on another state's shores, you're already very desperate, and there's no real difference that the state can draw. If they want it to be first come, first served, we say that's further morally arbitrary, and we'd like to hear them choose. My second argument about ensuring acceptance. Within this idea of sovereignty, we think in cases in which states have a reasonable expectation of the quality of life of refugees will be low, they must be able to choose to make a change. The state cannot offer them a new homeland and then welcome them into a house of hatred, abuse, unemployment, poverty, and degradation. When refugees don't fit in, their lives are unbearably hard, and the government should not be conducive to this, should not be complicit or complacent in this. When the refugees accepted are more likely to coalesce to their new homeland, their standard of life is higher. How does this happen? Cultural similarity actually is the missing link. Comprehension of language and norms and customs enable you to have equal societal treatment. Maybe that's based on prejudice. Maybe that's not fair, but that's the prejudice, unfair world we're living in. And in terms of tangible outcomes, we guarantee that they'll be better. We tell you firstly, anti-refugee sentiment significantly increases on side opposition. We tell you that this will further degrade the quality of life of refugees, and it's very harmful for a state to accept people they know their own citizens will target and persecute. There are three particular anti-refugee myths that are amplified and validated by team opposition. Firstly, we don't even know who's entering our country. When you remove the ability of the state to pick who's getting into the country, that myth is affirmed, that myth is promulgated in a very insidious way. Second myth, refugees are stealing my jobs. Refugees, quote unquote, steal jobs when they can't actually get a job that pays them well or treats them well. So when employers can hire refugees to work lower wages and longer hours, they replace native citizens with those refugees. When the refugees aren't as desperate in the first place because they have a vocational training that will allow them to have a real job that treats them well in that society, this won't happen. You debunk this myth of refugees are taking our jobs. Finally, this idea that refugees are criminals. When refugees are kept in a perpetual state of poverty and have no path to actually earning a legitimate living, of course organized crimes units know to target those people as the most desperate in society. These are three ways in which Team Op validates these myths and promotes anti-immigrant sentiment. And no, these myths aren't real, but they are the perceived realities of our world, and they're visceral. Team proposition and proposition alone gives you a path to a muted, diluted version of this rhetoric. It creates a society that's more politically stable and has a higher quality of life for refugees. These are the values upon which Team Proposition rests. We're very proud to propose.
We good? Developed nations shine a bright light out into the world. But on side opposition, we tell you the point at which that light starts to burn white hot is the point at which you are turned away from a state, not because that state cannot afford to accept you, not because the people of that state do not want to accept you, but because you don't speak English, because you're a Muslim, because the guy at the border has an interpretation of what culture means that says that German culture is for white people and not people from Eritrea. What is our stance on side opposition? Three things. First, we support the existing mechanisms that they point out exist. Namely, the only mechanism we think is actually universal to almost every state in the world is that people are prioritized based on their need. Second of all, we support training and language programs to allow people to get jobs. Note that that is the only example of something that is genuinely harmful to these individuals' abilities to get jobs, to, for example, not be forced into a life of crime. So we can literally assess that with language programs. That, by the way, exists already in almost every state in the world. Third and finally of all, we think we need to draw a distinction between between asylum seekers and refugees. And that is to say that the difference between an asylum seeker and a refugee is that an asylum seeker has a range of possible levels of need. At the lower end of that need, that could be someone, for example, who faces economic discrimination because they belong to a minority group. So Christians, for example, or in Iraq, or Jews in Yemen. On the higher end of that spectrum, we have individuals literally fighting for their life. So people who are persecuted because they are a member of a minority, like LGBT individuals in Uganda, or people whose hometowns have been bombed. We on side opposition think you should always choose to take the people, no thank you, who are most at need. Two burdens in this respect. One, this policy is morally wrong. Second, no thank you, it doesn't help refugees. Before I move on to my two arguments, I'm going to do a couple of bits of rebuttal. The first is that this policy is inexcusably vague. The only thing they tell you as to what the actual criteria looks like is if someone speaks the same language as you. We assume that if you give individuals at the border, no thank you, the power to say, my interpretation of English or German or French or Canadian culture is this, they will apply that to the selection process. That means people of a particular race, people of a particular ethnicity, people who have, no thank you, a particular set of beliefs. Or just saying, like, this person is from Syria, every Syrian person thinks in this way and has different cultural values to me, I probably shouldn't accept them. They need to clear that up in their second speech if they want to stand any chance of winning this debate. Three bits of rebuttal. The first is they can't have their cake and eat it. They cannot simultaneously claim that the vast majority of states in the world are really multicultural and they just love to accept these people and have a place for them, but also claim that the vast majority of states are racist and that these people are treated as criminals. We assume that the vast majority of states are reasonably willing to accept these individuals. Second point of rebuttal is their principle and about how they have an obligation, no thank you, to maintain things from the collective, i.e. the people already in that state. Two responses. The first, to use explicitly their phrasing, they have to prove to us this policy, i.e. letting in people who happen to be black, constitutes a violation of the state's right to protect their people. Because it's not intuitive to us inside opposition, but the fact that someone does not speak English is a fundamental affront or an attack on the well-being and therefore violates the contract between the state and the individual in that society. Second of all, note that language is literally the only thing they told us here as to why people feel fundamentally attacked. No analysis as to how that actually goes down. No thank you. Third point of rebuttal is they say these individuals feel targeted and persecuted. They basically tell us a bunch of myths that currently exist about refugees. Number one, these are myths, and we're all able to identify that they are myths in this room for a reason. You yourselves concede, no thank you, that the vast majority of people around the world, and the vast majority of states around the world, are willing to accept refugees irrespective of their background, because they recognise that it is more important to save people's lives than to discriminate along these kinds of lines. Second of all, but most important, to the second strand of this, most importantly of all, you can see that states already have a mechanism to stop people from coming into their country. So it's unclear to us why, second, no thank you, why at that point they have an obligation to accept everyone, or indeed will accept everyone. But third and finally of all, Arthur's going to tell you in his speech why these myths are much more likely to be validated at the point at which the state says we are not going to accept any Muslims or people who don't speak English because yes, they are more likely to be criminals. Yes, they are more likely to steal your jobs. That is the point at which racism, not only against those refugees, but against Muslim minorities and people who do not look the same as you in your country, gets much worse. No thank you. First argument, the principle. Two things here. First, we think that prioritising someone's culture and therefore turning away the most vulnerable individuals makes you complicit in the death of whatever happens, no thank you, to that individual. This policy necessarily means to prioritise some individuals. What does that look like? It means that there is currently an individual on our side of the house who would be accepted because the state decided that person's need is greater than someone else's. But this policy necessarily takes, no thank you, at least some of those people off the acceptance list and replaces them with people who happen to be more culturally similar to them. Let's think about this. The government decides to turn away these individuals. Necessarily, they turn away more of the individuals who currently be accepted under the status quo. The individuals who currently are accepted under the status quo are the people who are the most vulnerable, people who the state has already made a calculation about being more at risk of persecution, more at risk of death. This policy necessarily condemns those individuals. So, I'll take one in a couple of seconds down at once. Second strand of this argument is that this is fundamentally a discriminatory policy. It is unjust to discriminate against someone on the basis of factors entirely outside their control, because they don't speak English, because they were born into a state where they happen not to be a white person, because their culture, by the way, we still have no idea what this actually looks like, is dissimilar, so they celebrate different festivals. We think this is fundamentally just wrong. I think it's intuitive to everyone in this room that there is something morally, you have to be a morally bankrupt individual to turn around and say, look at these individuals that are currently getting in. They have been chosen because they have fundamental needs. But no, the fact they don't speak English and the fact this other guy does is a more important criterion to allow this individual to be selected. It is fundamentally wrong. No thank you. Second argument about how you have fewer refugees accepted. This is the most important thing in in this debate, and it's why Canada are going to lose. In the world at the moment, you have very high rates of acceptance of refugees. There are very, very few states that systematically turn around and say, no, we will not accept any refugees. We think that is because there is a very strong message, no thank you currently, that you have to be a morally bankrupt individual to turn away people who have serious need. This policy literally says to those individuals, those members of the German public, who already believe it is fundamentally acceptable to allow these people in, irrespective of whether they are Muslim, that is now a legitimate criteria, and that criteria suspends your moral obligation. What do we realistically think this policy will look like in terms of consequences? If you are, for example, a German, we think it means you are much, much more likely to turn around and say, actually no, at the point at which we run out of white, Christian, German-speaking individuals who we can accept from other countries, we will ask our governments to stop accepting any individuals whatsoever. So insofar as this debate is about ensuring that the most vulnerable individuals are provided with somewhere to go and somewhere to escape the persecution that is endemic to their homeland for reasons beyond their control, that is the point where individuals are more likely to be persecuted. That is the point where individuals are more likely to just be turned home en masse. Side proposition towards this debate is about two things. First, does a state have the right to arbitrarily discriminate against people on the basis of factors that are entirely beyond their control? We asked you to feel like what is the difference between, for example, you being discriminated against because you don't speak English, and the difference between you being black. And they said that your English was a fundamental attack on that society. We have told you that that is fundamentally not correct, that does not violate your obligation of the state. But second of all, and most importantly, we told you that you not only accept fewer individuals who are genuinely vulnerable, because for this policy to have any teeth whatsoever, that must be the calculation that governments are now making. But second of all, we talked about the individual person on the ground who votes for refugee policy and pressures the government. Now that individual, when you tell them it is legitimate for them to discriminate against people, is more likely to do so. Very proud to oppose.
Thank you. I'd like to make four things very clear at the start of this speech. First, this debate is not about forcing countries to take refugees. So all of the xenophobic states they talk about on Team England that don't want to take refugees, that hate people because of the color of their skin, are going to continue not taking refugees on their side of the house. The only difference is, if they can no longer prioritize those they wish to take, then the net is no refugees taken versus at least some refugees taken on the basis of cultural similarity. Second, it was an assertion and a mischaracterization for Team England to say that Team Canada said that all states were xenophobic. All we have to defend is that some states should be able to use this as a part of their toolbox of ways to judge who enters and who doesn't. So very generous countries like Canada, which I'm very proud to come from, will be able to take lots of refugees from lots of different cultures. But countries like Hungary, which absolutely could not have that on their side of the house, should be able to prioritize it on different grounds. Third, Team England say that our criteria of culture is extremely vague. I'm not really sure why this is true. We talked about the culture they practice. We talked about the language. We get the language of majority or a language that's commonly spoken in the region. We talked about things like religion, right? Like, I'm not sure why this is such an unclear ground. But also, we think it's fair to leave this up to different states to decide on their own. We don't have to make a model for a worldwide policy. We just need to support this being a criteria can be mentioned. No thank you. Now, final thing I'd like to make clear, however, is this debate is not just about the number of refugees that are taken, especially considering this is a debate about political asylum. So these aren't people starving to death. These aren't people who are like climate refugees. These are people fleeing persecution, meaning the most important thing is to make sure they aren't persecuted in the new state they go to, otherwise you haven't really helped them, which is why all of our material about how they will be mistreated is so important. Now, on to refutation. First, Team England's stance says that they support existing mechanisms and that most states already have a system that slots people seeking asylum based on need. That is a complete assertion, right? Countries like Iran don't do that. Countries like Russia don't do that. Countries like India don't do that, right? So don't assert that this is the way most of the world works. But now let's move on to their argumentation. Their first argument was about the principle, with a rather odd premise, which is that prioritizing people based on their culture makes you culpable to the death of people you didn't prioritize. This is wrong for a number of reasons. First of all, the extension of this principle is every time you don't take a refugee, you're culpable for their death. So should all states be forced to take as many refugees as possible? Would they also make it so that immigration policy can't be based on people you let in? Notice, ladies and gentlemen, in their stance, Team England says economic discrimination is a criteria. Lots of people immigrate because of economic discrimination, but in their stance, they never clarify whether they would make it so that immigration criteria can't be based on culture either. But second, there are plenty of other ways states can help people who are in need. They can construct refugee camps like the M1 camp in Mosul in other countries. They can give foreign aid. They can give diplomatic aid to people. They can sanction countries that arrest political prisoners or put pressure on countries like China for throwing Ai Weiwei in prison. So this principle accepting asylum seekers isn't the only route in which we can help people. Now, their second argument, how they have fewer people accepted. First, a huge assertion, which was that in the status quo, countries are very happy to take lots of refugees all the time, right? Have they heard of the United States? Have they heard of Hungary? Have they heard of France? Have they heard of Sweden? Have they heard of all countries that don't want to take Tamil refugees, right? There are so many places in the world where people don't want to take refugees. For them to assert that we're making the world worse doesn't acknowledge the reality in front of their eyes. Second, they say that you legitimize the criteria of rejection. In their world, xenophobic England has to defend a world either where no longer are countries allowed to set this criteria, or two, that no states should choose this. Why in that world are fewer refugees taken? First, people are angry that the state is either compelled to or chose to take people on a different priority, either because they believe that they've forsaken those who are actually culturally similar. I point to the example of Iran, which prioritized taking Shia Afghan refugees during the Soviet occupation. Under Team England's world, where Iran didn't do that, then all of the cultural solidarity built around taking refugees would have been lost because there would no longer be that religious connection. Why is that so important? First, because fewer refugees would have been taken. But second, when those Shia refugees came in, Iranian people treated them very well. They let them into their homes. They let them into their mosques. They taught them how to speak Farsi. They gave them food and helped them raise their children. This is generosity that no longer exists on Team England's side. But second, even though Shias were prioritized, once the country was open to taking refugees because of cultural similarity, some Pashtun refugees were able to come to Iran afterwards. So even on their own mechanism criteria, we are able to better provide that. But second, some countries just won't take any refugees at all. These are the worst case states that Team England wanted to talk about. In those cases, on their side, they still won't take any refugees, but because they aren't prioritizing refugees they care about, then those refugees that are culturally similar will also be left behind. So the comparative, in their best world, the one that they care about, is worse. But third, let's talk about countries who, might not be totally opposed to taking refugees if they were no longer able to set the priority, but would prefer to take refugees that are culturally similar. What's the problem here? All of the other mechanisms of help Team Canada's talk about, providing money for refugee camps, providing foreign aid, supporting other governments in resettling refugees, goes away because there's no longer that cultural impetus to help in the first place. Notice, these are other mechanisms Team England never acknowledged in the debate so far. Why is this argument so important? First, we win the debate on Team England's ground. We don't think it's the right ground, in fairness, but if that's the ground they want to stand on, we're going to win on it as well. But second, it's important because by showing how cultural similarity is actually a gateway to taking more refugees of different cultures, we win on the very mechanism they want to stand on. Don't let Team England get away with false assertions about this debate or about Team Canada's case. They need to defend why no states should have the ability to control who gets in and who gets out of their country on the criteria they choose. So proud to propose.
So apparently, this policy doesn't apply in Canada, the UK, Germany, France, South Africa, Kenya, Tunisia. In fact, the only place this policy applies is Hungary. Because Hungary is a country which really wants to accept refugees, but currently doesn't because it only wants to accept refugees which have a Hungarian culture. The problem here is that there aren't that many refugees that have a wholly Hungarian culture. And while there are some that are slightly more Hungarian, it's unclear where on that line they think is Hungarian enough that Hungary will want to start accepting these refugees. We think the fact that Hungary doesn't like accepting refugees today is because of a whole range of reasons, including the fact that it thinks that overwhelmingly the refugees who want to come into Hungary are different from Hungary. And just because some of them are less different doesn't mean that it wants to accept them any more than it does any of the others. They cannot win this debate if their only understanding of the world is one in which Canada and the UK and all the countries which overwhelmingly do accept refugees don't have a culture. Because even in those countries, they're going to have to prioritize refugees and asylum seekers who are more culturally similar, and as a result, they're going to have to deprioritize individuals who are more vulnerable on their side of the house. That's what Ed told you, and that's what they totally ignored. Because they're the side that is leaving individuals out in the cold to live in war zones and to live under political persecution because they want people who are white and speak English to come into their countries. No thank you. I'm going to talk to you about the effects of minority groups inside those countries and how it gets enormously worse for them. First, a couple of bits of rebuttals. So one, they told you that the state has a duty only if A, it helps the asylum seekers, and B, it helps domestic individuals. No thank you. So let's break both of these down. Firstly, on asylum seekers, given that we told you that we accept the most vulnerable asylum seekers, i.e. those who are under an extreme threat, people living in war zones, people who are being discriminated against or oppressed, people living in Palmyra, or gay people in Uganda. Intuitively, right, let's just look at this. Do you think the life of a gay person in Uganda is better or worse when they're living in Canada? Even if they're not able to get the best job possible, even if they're not able to become a CEO, we think intuitively the fact that they're not being shoved in prison, that their family isn't being tortured, means their life is better when they're in the country. And by the way, that's why they left their countries in the first place. Secondly, in terms of domestic people, because Ed asked you what it is about the colour of someone's skin, or the fact that they have a slightly different religious ceremony to you, that makes it so bad for the other people in that country. And they had no response here because they understood that just because someone's a Muslim doesn't mean they're less able to be a part of Britain or Canada. No response at all. Finally, if those are their only criteria, even if we believe everything they told you about how these individuals are going to get on worse in these countries, then they also have to accept that there are going to be less individuals taken into these countries overall. Because if they're only willing to accept individuals who are going to have a vastly improved quality of life and who are going to benefit the host countries, then they're going to have to accept fewer individuals overall by their very own logic. What else did they tell you? They told you that in response to Ed's principle, and the principle I just taught you, if you extend this principle, then maybe you'll have a duty to accept all refugees. Well, no, because this is a policy which takes people who would have been helped, who would have been given a host nation, and says to them that you can't come into our country on the basis of something you cannot control. Because you can't decide what colour your skin is, or what language you speak, or what religion you are a part of. As a result, if that person who's been turned away from your country dies, that is a burden we think is entirely on you, and that's why you have a duty to accept it. They told you that there are lots of other solutions to this problem. Yeah, that's true, but it's true on both sides of the debate. And refugees are still flocking to the shores of European nations despite these other solutions. We think you have a duty to accept them. Then they said that they said basically that there are some countries which don't prefer the most vulnerable people, like Iran. It's unclear why, just because Iran doesn't prefer the most vulnerable people, the vast majority of nations which they themselves have told you accept refugees overwhelmingly do prefer the most vulnerable people, and even if they don't, we think they should. Go ahead.
What's the algorithm that you think states should use that determines who's needier between the Ugandan person and the Syrian refugee?
Look, it's quite simple. One, is your life under immediate threat if you are turned away from our country? If that is the case, then we should let you into their country. Which is why we prefer people who would be killed in a war zone over people whose freedom of speech is impinged. We think that their freedom of speech being impinged is bad, but we'd much rather prefer the people who are going to be chucked in prison for the rest of their lives or tortured over the people who have slightly less concerns. That's the calculus used by every nation on the planet, guys. It's not that complicated. Look, I'm going to talk to you about minority groups inside these countries, because the underlying logic inside Proposition's case is that it is okay for states to prioritize individuals
instead, independent of what threat they're under, based on cultural factors, i.e. to very publicly say that some groups of individuals are more Canadian or Australian or Kenyan than others. What are the tangible impacts on a diaspora in these countries and on the people who are from these minority cultures who just so happen to live there? Two things. One, for the individuals themselves, this amounts to a policy whereby their state says that they are less a part of the nation than other individuals, where they say, just because you're a Muslim, you are less American than Americans who are Christian. Their policy tells individuals that they're not welcome, they're not normal, and they're not part of the majority in any way. That's incredibly isolating. It's incredibly degrading to be told by a country that you love that you're not important and that you're not welcome. You're more likely to retreat from integrating with the country, something they say is so important. You're more likely to define yourself as opposition to a state which you think has defined itself in opposition to you. You're literally enshrined in law is a policy which says that you are less. That means Algerians in France, North Africans in Germany, Eritreans in Tunisia feel like they are not welcome, like they are not okay, and that is disgusting for a side proposition to support. Secondly, and maybe even more importantly, for the majority groups, they're likely to turn against minorities in that country. We saw in the aftermath of the Trump administration implementing a ban on Muslim immigration and asylum seekers from Muslim nations, a measurable increase in the instances of Islamophobia and Islamophobic violence, of firebombings of mosques, of employment discrimination against Muslims, of the use of ethnic slurs against Muslim people, of attacks on women in burqas. It's not a coincidence that these things tracked a governmental announcement, literally, that not only these people were not American, but also that we were happy to enshrine that principle in law. That's why their policy is problematic, because it feeds into a far-right narrative that allows individuals like Gert Wilders in the Netherlands to say that Moroccans are not a part of this country. It allows individuals who might think that or might not to be justified in saying those things because it is literally enshrined in law. On the comparative, we're the side that says you should accept people based on who needs it the most. We're the side that actually helps not only the most vulnerable people, but more people overall, because people no longer hate refugees, and for that reason, I beg you to oppose.
Thank you. I want to clear up three things before I get into my main areas of clash. The first, the biggest mischaracterization on team opposition is that there are somehow mutually exclusive categories of people who are just religiously, culturally similar and people who are persecuted. They've never been able to tell you why it can't overlap, and why in fact there are oftentimes people who are in desperate need of being helped who also just happen to be religiously similar to you, who happen to speak the same language. So when they paint the choice that you're making as always being between someone who is equally as white as you and the dying Syrian who's bleeding on your doorstep, it's not always true. They can overlap, and in many cases they do. Second thing to point out, opposition can't make this debate one about we're taking in fewer people overall on team proposition. The reason is both teams are taking in the same number of refugees. The question becomes, when there are trade-offs that have to be made, is it okay for states to prioritize certain factors over others? But moreover, proposition is just claiming that we actually broaden the pool of people that are taken in because states are more willing to take in people and they feel like they have control over their own borders. So we're not saying that you should take in fewer refugees. Thirdly, the strategic flaw in opposition's case is that they bank all of their harms on the worst case scenario of team proposition. There are two reasons why this is strategically flawed. One, there's very little engagement about all of the benefits of the host of countries who would just use this to improve the lives of refugees. So people like Ethiopia, for example, Ethiopian refugees coming into Italy, for example, who have a religious connection, and then now being able to access religions and religious institutions that are meaningful to those people. But second of all, if they bank their case on the worst countries, their own mechanism relies on those same states to make a good judgment call on who to take in. So if they're saying that these states are so corrupt, so xenophobic, they also rely on them to accurately assess who is in need of their life being saved at this moment. So they can't get any of their benefits in the worst case scenario, but they're not engaging with the full scope of our case. Two areas of clash. Firstly, the principle of protecting people and who states should prioritize. And second of all, how do we actually best protect these refugees? Firstly, on the principle, The major claim that we've gotten pushed on us from Team Opposition is that it should be needs-based. We force states to turn away the person who's bleeding at the doorstep in exchange for the refugee who just speaks the same culture. A couple things to point out. First, their principle is hung on proving a better outcome for refugees. Because if their metric is needs-based, if we can prove to you that those needs aren't actually fulfilled, that their quality of life gets worse in certain ways, then it isn't actually true that their needs are being fulfilled in the most direct sense. To contrast, our principle is independent of the practicality. Our principle about the ability of states to control their borders doesn't necessarily rely on refugees being benefited, and we haven't heard engagement on that. My first response is, they assume that it's a zero-sum game when we choose to take in a refugee. That is to say that, if I take in one refugee, the other refugee will necessarily die or be seriously ill. Because we told you that there are other alternatives for those other refugees. It's not just the case of all of the white people go to the United States. It looks like, for example, the Alawites in Syria going to Iran, where there's a huge Shia population. It looks like those Coptic Christians going to Italy and to other states with huge Christian populations. It looks like states putting in money into camps with states across their border. So all of these things are possible. It doesn't mean the choice that you're making is between saving someone and someone dying. Second of all, the key assumption in the point about the principle is that we can actually delineate whose needs are greater or who needs protecting. Their criteria is who has an immediate threat to their life. I posit to you, on one hand, you have a gay man in Uganda who's being told that he will be killed, and then you have the Syrian who is fleeing his village that has just been bombed. Both immediate threats to their life, but very different. The key point that I'm making here is this. It is very difficult to delineate who has the greatest need. In the absence of a state being able to delineate that need, we need to consider other options. I draw the analogy here of triage. If you have two patients who have very fatal wounds, like someone has a wound in their chest, someone has a wound in their side, we consider other criteria like who is best able to survive the operation, who will be of best use to that society. Say, for example, it's a soldier who will best be able to contribute to the war effort if they recover. So if states can't delineate who is in most need, we need to consider who can best become a part of that society, and that debunks their assumption of there's only one criteria that matters. Third thing I'd like to point out.
Points of information.
Yeah, go ahead.
Which of these two individuals have greater needs which should be fulfilled? The Syrian, who's removed from a list of accepted asylum seekers, or a political dissident in China?
So the problem is your side is the one that has to make that choice, not ours. What we're saying is states can make a variety of choices about who they want to take in. Some will choose to say, like, look, we think you're both important. Some will say we only have space for one, so we want to ensure that the one that we take in will have the better quality of life, and that he can actually be a part of our population. You're the side that also has to make the delineation and prove that it can be made. The third response that I would give you is that it's oftentimes a false choice that OPP is giving you. They're saying that it's a choice between the dying Syrian refugee and then on the other hand, someone who just speaks the same language. But for most of the states that we're talking about, it's a choice between taking in no refugee or taking in a refugee. This is not all of the states we're talking about, but in the few where the greatest impact would be occurring is in the case where they wouldn't otherwise take in a refugee. They now feel more comfortable to do so. I want to look at the second theme, this area about how do we actually improve the quality of life for these refugees when they come into our country. The major argument that we get here is that xenophobia is strengthened when states can say, we only let in certain types of people, these people are more Canadian, more Kenyan, whatever it may be. So my first response is, it's an assumption that has never been actually proven by Team Opposition. The states are only going to take in one type of person, that the US will only take in the white guy, that Canada will also only take in the white guy. Like, most of these states have very different types of populations within their overall population. And that is to say that they can take in many different types of people, depending on whether or not they're able to be a part of that identity and to become a part of that culture. But second of all, once again, strategically, when they make this argument, they're talking about the types of states that are already mobilizing xenophobia as a reason to not take in refugees in the first place. They don't get any unique benefits. When that racist border guard, the guy who's on patrol on the security line, can still turn someone away for a reason that's arbitrary, but mask it in their needs are lesser. Those same states can still have the problems of mobilizing xenophobia. Our unique benefits that we're never engaged with were when you lower or when you get rid of the myths about a refugee being very different from us, then it makes it easier or more likely that you'll take in other refugees because you just debunk the stigma attached to the term refugee in and of itself. It's more likely that you'll be okay with other types of people when you believe that being a foreigner isn't inherently harmful, isn't inherently exclusive to being a part of this state. What are you left with then from both teams at the side of this debate? From opposition, they've never actually been able to prove to you why states will be able to delineate on a need-by-need basis, because that's their whole mechanism. But even if they are able to do so, the cases in which they bank most of their harms on team proposition are the same cases where you get harms occurring on their world. States turning away people under the guise of your immediate needs aren't as immediate as other people's needs. What they fail to engage with is that our world is broader and engages with more states than those that are just more xenophobic. But for the ones that are xenophobic, they're able to take in refugees when they otherwise would have been unable to. Panel. We can't take in every single refugee. There will be a choice that has always had to be made. The question becomes, when a choice is necessarily going to be made, do we want to ensure that the person that's brought in actually has a good quality of life? The people of that country are willing to take them in? Team proposition says yes. Thank you.
Much like their karaoke, Team Canada's case was not only pitchy, but completely out of key. You see the change in stance in that third speaker speech when she said, countries are diverse, and hey, they overlap, and in many cases, individuals will still be able to get in. Because apparently, there are a lot of similarities in religion between Ethiopia and Italy. Now, intuitive to me, that doesn't seem like the case. But remember, if it is the case, that's slightly problematic for them. Because if it's the case that this directly overlaps on the basis of culture and identity in a way that we don't think it does, how is that going to be used as a tool of prioritization if each of those people all fulfill that category? Necessarily, they are excluding people on the basis of things that are completely out of their control in a way that we think is fundamentally illegitimate. Three areas of clash in this debate. Firstly, is it principally fair to discriminate based on culture? Secondly, the effect on asylum seekers. And thirdly, internal support for refugees. So, firstly, is it principally fair to discriminate based on culture? The first line of side proposition comes straight out of the politics textbook. They say the state is a policy, an abstract entity, and therefore has twofold duties. The first of which is to help refugees in their country assimilate. The second is to help their domestic people. So on the first of which, we challenge whether or not it can really get much worse for individuals that are fleeing from persecution. And remember, chose to run away from their countries. And that was a response we give you in our speech. It's no response in the last speaker's speech. But remember, being jobless in Germany is probably still better than being put in their best case alternative of a refugee camp. These are notably places where refugees are stuck for years upon years. Kakuma refugee camp in Kenya, there are literally children who are being born in that refugee camp and are still yet to be allowed to leave. In fact, once you shut them out in the way the side proposition supports, these people are likely to be shut there for an extended period of time. But secondly, in terms of the help to domestic people, Arthur gives you an argument as to why. When you legitimize this as a state policy of discrimination, rates of Islamophobic attacks rise, attacks on women wearing burqas rise, all of those forms of discriminatory practices against the very people that side proposition tell you they have a responsibility to, because those are members of your country. But next, they said, what was the basis of this discrimination? They said, well, because of these myths surrounding refugees, notably the one about them being unable to get jobs and therefore turn into crime, their geography, their customs, their religions are the reason that we can bar them. At no point do they show the causal link between you being from a certain geography, meaning that you're unable to get a job. And if that was the only link they wanted to have, the only one was language, to which your response is, well, I don't know, maybe we should teach them English or teach them German, which, remember, is status quo. The majority of nations around the world already adopt those policies, so really, we didn't understand what their problem was. But finally, they said, well, what about you're all on the border and you're all equally desperate and vulnerable? What does this policy say? Because if we looked at, say, people fleeing from Rwanda into neighboring nations, and you decided to say, well, there are both Hutus and Tutsis on our border, but because we're more ethnically similar or culturally similar to Tutsis, Hutus wait in line, wait in your nation, and you cannot enter on the basis of your culture and your beliefs, Really? That is the world the side proposition wants to stand and support, one in which they fundamentally discriminate against these people. But the third tries to remedy this element in their case by saying, well, you have to make a judgment call at some stage, which one is easier for you to delineate. Worst case scenario, if all of these individuals are equally vulnerable, we would rather make a random choice on the selection of those people in that highest vulnerability category, instead of saying all of you are equally vulnerable, but because you are a Muslim or because you are a Christian, we are not going to allow you to enter our country. That intuitively sounds a lot worse to me than any other system that we could support. Secondly, the effect on asylum seekers. They say, well, they want to get away from this. They said it's about prioritization, not exclusion. It's not a hard and fast rule. Firstly, something has to change in order for that policy to be one of prioritization, because someone had to have not received that space, it had not been for their policy. Other than that would not be a prioritization of them entering the country. But secondly, if your problem is that of backlash, you still create it. Because the second speaker literally stood up and said, and I quote, oh, there were people that seemed vaguely Muslim in Germany, and that spread backlash throughout that country. All you need is a small group of people that you can assert are from Syria, as opposed to even being North African, to create all of the backlash that they think is so harmful in regions like Cologne under their side. So what does this crucially indicate to you for side proposition? It's a sign that would say that because not even you're Muslim, you look like you could be a Muslim, that is a legitimate basis on which a state to err on the side of caution and then not allow you into the country. We think that is a fundamental abrogation of that individual's human rights not to be discriminated against on factors that are out of their control. But secondly, the question panel you have to ask yourself is, what are the countries that we're talking about? Because I'll take it a second. Their second speaker says, Canada would effectively be too nice to use this policy because they've already let in loads of refugees. Congratulations, Canada. We'd like to think that the UK are similar. France, Germany, very similar in that case. Who are the nations that they're actually talking about? It's nations like Hungary. They say in their third, this is the area of greatest impact. I've changed my mind, no thank you. Let's look at what are the reasons why Hungary is unlikely to accept refugees. Firstly, we don't think the fact that they can't discriminate based on culture is the limiting factor on the Hungarian government not letting in refugees, as opposed to we don't like refugees. But secondly, how do you find Syrians that already speak Hungarian before they enter the country, that already know of Hungarian customs and beliefs? So even if they are discriminating on the basis of culture, and they're only letting in the refugees that fill those categories, sure, we think that you're far more likely to see no refugees accepted on your side either. Give it a go.
Is it racist for Italy to prefer Ethiopian Christians because the religious similarity means they can integrate better, especially if, as you say, they might be in Italy for several years?
Yes, we think it is completely racist for me to decide that because you are a Christian, because you are a Muslim, that is the reason I'm not going to let you into my country. I think that is intuitive, and I think that's the reason why you guys unfortunately lost this debate. Let's look secondly. We think that fundamentally this undermines the suggestion of a moral duty to accept refugees. Because it says, hey, it would be cool, but it's more out of convenience. It's more about, well, if you don't quite fit into our culture, if we can't assimilate you as easily as we'd like to into the Ethiopian chubs in Italy, that is not a basis on which we're allowed to let you into the country. Thirdly and finally, let's look at internal support for refugees. They give one example of you welcoming in Shia refugees into Afghanistan with open arms. Remember, that is one directional, and therefore is likely to say that if they are not Shia, in fact, if they are Sunni, you shouldn't let them in with open arms. Instead, you should close your doors and lock your windows because these are people that we should let into our country. Arthur literally explains to you why the very introduction of this policy, as we saw with Trump's travel ban, would increase the number of attacks on innocent people within your country. People who now believe that it's legitimate for us to discriminate on the basis of your culture being different from us, barring you from the country. Increased calls, whether it be Gert Wilders or the Front National or otherwise, that now say, well, if we're not letting these asylum seekers in, how about we kick the people who are already in our country out? The fact that they refuse to respond to that analysis, the crucial support and the state's duty to protect its people within its borders, which they claim is so important, means you have to vote side opposition.
On side opposition, we presented a picture of the world in which refugees come from a diverse range of places across the world, and that those individuals leave and seek asylum for a variety of reasons. In Implicit in that is the fact they have different levels of need. And we told you that there are also a select group of countries that overwhelmingly are responsible for admitting the most refugees on the planet. So it was fairly intuitive that if you give that select group of countries the power to systematically stop individuals of particular ethnicities and tell their people that discriminating against people because they look different to you or because they haven't had the advantage of an English teacher, you're more likely to get racism and you get fewer refugees accepted. 2 questions. Is this policy just? Second of all, what are the consequences for asylum seekers? To the first, the prop advance in this debate went as follows. They said a government has an obligation to protect native people. But the premise of this argument was that allowing refugees in who are not of the same culture as you is in some way violating that relationship. It breaks the state burden to the individual. We asked you in our first speech, how on earth does the fact that I am English, I do not speak English, or the fact that I am a Muslim, impede the ability for you to provide for the state rights to those individuals? If anything, it's the same under both sides, because an individual detracts in economic terms, and that is not along the line of whether you're a Muslim or not. We brought you down in our first speech, and it received no response. So for those claiming they have a principled stance in this debate, does not make sense. The second thing they said of this is, that these individuals will be harmed. We said again, okay, let's think about this. Yeah, you're right. A Muslim woman in Syria who leaves to go to Germany, who perhaps faces some economic discrimination, you're right. That is a much worse quality of life for her than being sold into the sex trade or having her genitals mutilated by a terrorist group that fundamentally believes she is not a human being in the same way that a man is. But what did we bring you on this? We told you that fundamentally this policy is discriminatory. And in the worst case scenario, we prefer picking up people on a random basis than just saying, oh yeah, just because you happen to be a black person, you will never get into our nation. And the only response they had to this is, oh yeah, but some people will integrate better, so like that discrimination is slightly less tenable. Slightly more tenable. First, how does this work? If they are as diverse as these states are, as diverse as they claim, there are very few groups who fall along these lines. It's very, very confusing to us why, if these are such diverse states, there are groups who will find it that difficult to integrate. But second of all, we just don't care. Even if an individual is slightly better able to integrate, it is not fair to allow that individual in if there is someone who has a genuinely greater need of the protections that that state could afford them. So to the second question, on the consequences for asylum seekers, we told you in opposition this. Vulnerable individuals are necessarily turned away. That is what the word prioritise means, and that's what happens when you drag culture into what is already a selection process that is fairly simple. The only response they give to this first comes in their third speech, which don't in and of itself is acceptable, but they don't challenge the mechanism. They don't challenge the fact that actually you are likely to throw out vulnerable people. They contend that people have different levels of vulnerability. That, as we told you down the bench, is factually inaccurate. We told you that in our stance, there are people arriving at the EU border who are asylums by economic pressures and a lack of employment in Eritrea, and there are also people rocking up who the Ugandan government wants dead. There are also people rocking up who have had their homes, their families destroyed and killed by terrorist organisations. So to claim there are different levels of need in this debate is absurd. The second thing they told you here is, we increased the number of refugees. We've told you time and time again, first, that there's a very small number of nations who fundamentally don't want any refugees at the moment, but the moment you say, oh yeah, you have slightly less foreign refugees, we'll take them. There are very few white, Christian, German-speaking people who are seeking asylum in Germany who are not already German. But third, we gave you an argument that has not yet been responded to as to how when you tell a public it is fair to discriminate, they are more likely to stop accepting all refugees together. That is the most important thing in this debate, and there is a difference between these two teams. The last thing is, in our second speech, we told you about racism against individuals. Because these are culturally diverse nations, those individuals are much more likely to be persecuted. The fact that they have not responded is damning for side proposition.
Thank you. Team England's strategic flirtation over the past hour with subtly telling the panel that Team Canada is racist doesn't actually work. Team Canada did not invent the fact that it's harder to integrate to a culture that you're not similar to. We didn't decide that that's how the world should be ordered. It just is how the world is ordered. Our team acknowledges that fact and protects people from it. Their side doesn't either. Team England came into this debate. They slandered us, they strawmanned us, they misrepresented our arguments again and again and again. That is culturally dissimilar from our Canadian values, and we beg the panel not to credit them for it. Two questions for this debate. Firstly, is this a legitimate choice? Secondly, what benefits the quality of life of refugees? On legitimacy, I'd like to point out that Team England tried to have this questions debate on a moral grounds. Their moral ticker is something we can talk about before we get into legitimacy, if you buy that this is about morality, but we think it's about legitimacy, and I'll tell you why. On morality, they told us that the blood of culturally dissimilar refugees is on our hand. That's problematic because they didn't come here and tell you that states should be forced to accept all refugees that show up, which means on both teams, some blood is going to be on some hands. They chose to make the choice on the basis of need, and there's a few problems with that. Firstly, there's enough of a population that passes the threshold of need that the government will still have to make choices within that group of people and pick a segment of that group of people. Our segment is the group that's going to succeed in the country the most. Secondly, it's not as if need is somehow a concrete, tangible metric that's easy to assess. To use their example, who's more needy, the queer Ugandan man or the Yemeni Jewish man? Their only answer to this was, well, clearly the person whose life is on the line. Both of their lives are on the line. There are further choices you have to make. It's not that morally black and white. We tell you that someone who puts themselves on a journey with no concrete destination is in an extreme state of need, and the government doesn't get to decide who's more or less needy. But thirdly, if they think it's bad for this mythical man at the border to decide that you're not culturally similar enough, it's probably also bad for that man at the border to say being queer is a mutable trait, and therefore you're not in need. Go back to Uganda. Which, by the way, is not even how the process works at all. Panel, if you take only one thing away from my speech, please note that in their reply speech, their metric shifted from a needs basis to a random basis. In their reply, they said, we take refugees on a random basis. This is a violent shift, and we don't think you can give the win to the teams who we don't even know what they want after an hour of having this out. Okay. We think England's note of moral superiority is off-key. They told us that factors of cultural similarity are morally arbitrary. That may be true in abstract, Rawlsian, philosophical terms, but functionally, they are not arbitrary. They determine how your life goes. But this debate is about legitimacy, because it's not what should the state do, it's what should the state be able to do, and we proved that border control is within the remit of the state. But what about the quality of life of refugees? I'm not going to talk about this too much because they didn't prioritize this in their case. They only had a sort of throwaway third argument about how the state sends a message with their laws. We told you that there is a tangible link between speaking the language, having a comprehension of norms, having an existing group of compatriots in your destination that makes your life better. We didn't invent that fact. It's just a fact. It's not racist to say that your quality of life will be lower if every time you walk out the door you're bewildered and, what's more, attacked. Both teams had points on reducing anti-immigrant sentiment. Theirs had no link. It was that a law sends a message. We gave you clear mechanisms of how we target these specific myths of anti-refugee people. They didn't acknowledge that in many cases the choice is between controlling who comes into your borders or taking in no one at all. They didn't dispute that that was true, and they didn't tell you why that was okay. So they've lost this debate by all their own metrics. We are very proud to propose.